Our gospel lesson is the second part of John's Gospel, chapter 4. The last couple of Sundays, we've been assigned some pretty long passages from John's Gospel. We're going to pick up in this long conversation that Jesus has with the woman at the well. We're going to pick up at verse 27. Let us honor, as you're able, please stand. Let us honor the reading of the Gospel. Just then, Jesus' disciples came. They were astonished that he was speaking with the woman, but no one said, "What do you want?" or "Why are you speaking with her?" Then the woman left her water jar and went back to the city. She said to the people, "Come and see a man who told me everything I have ever done. He cannot be the Messiah, can he?" They left the city and were on their way to him. Meanwhile, the disciples were arguing with him, urging him, "Rabbi, eat something." But he said to them, "I have food to eat that you do not know about." So the disciples said to one another, "Surely no one has brought him something to eat." Jesus said to them, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to complete this work. Do you not say 4 months more, then comes the harvest? But I tell you, look around you and see how the fields are ripe for harvesting. The reaper is already receiving wages and is gathering fruit for eternal life, so that sower and reaper may rejoice together. For here the saying holds true, one sows and another reaps. I sent you to reap that for which you did not labor. Others have labored, and you have entered into their labor." Many Samaritans from that city believed in Jesus because of the woman's testimony. "He told me everything I have ever done." So when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days. And many more believed because of his word. They said to the woman, "It is no longer because of what you said that we believe, for we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this is truly the Savior of the world." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. I'm indebted to Jason Michelli. He is a very gifted pastor and theologian whose sermon on this passage had some great insights, and they're included in today's message. I just wanted to lift that up for full transparency. If you've ever worked in an office, you may have overheard or maybe been a part of a water cooler conversation. You know, in a lot of offices, they have that giant, clear, blue bottle of water that is there for workers to stop by and grab a cool drink, maybe take a quick break, hang out for a few minutes, talk about what they did last weekend or what their plans are for the coming weekend, talk about their kids or their spouses or their hobbies. Also, maybe to share in a little bit of the office scuttlebutt, also known as gossip. That word scuttlebutt has an interesting origin. It is a nautical term. To scuttle a ship means to cut a hole in the hull in order to sink it. Often the cargo on a lot of ships included water that was stored in large caskets or barrels that were called butts. So when sailors wanted to get a fresh drink of water, they would scuttle a butt, they would cut a hole in the barrel and enjoy a nice, cool, refreshing sip of water. Maybe they would gather around these barrels and swap a few stories about their lives, or maybe what they're hearing about what's going on in other parts of the ship. In John's Gospel, we might imagine that the well in the Samaritan city of Sychar was a place where people gathered to get a drink for themselves and for their families, maybe swap a few stories, but also to share in the town's scuttlebutt. We also might imagine that a particular woman used to show up early in the morning when everyone else would arrive at the well. And when she showed up, she noticed that conversations quickly ceased. And everyone else would remember that they had somewhere else to be. We might imagine that when this woman realized that she was the topic of the scuttlebutt, she decided to retrieve her water at a different time, at noon, when nobody else would be there. People read this story from John 4 about the Samaritan woman, and they come to different conclusions about the woman. Many people feel sorry for her. A much harsher view says that she is receiving the consequences of her own actions that have violated community standards, that she is perhaps a woman of ill repute. She is choosing to live an alleged immoral lifestyle. And many well-intentioned preachers and Sunday school teachers have taught that she's kind of getting what she deserves, but maybe the community went way too far and they shamed her. But Jesus comes along and he knows how to shame her gently so that she can see the error of her ways. What's interesting is that when you actually read the story, there's no mention of sin or adultery or any kind of sexual immorality. And despite what some people claim, Jesus does not tell the woman at the well to go and sin no more. That's a different woman in another story in John's Gospel. Nor does Jesus suggest to her that she needs to go out and get married immediately so that she will become a respectable member of the community. One pastor points out that this is the longest conversation that Jesus has with anyone in all of the Gospels. Jesus says more to this outcast woman than he does to Nicodemus. Remember Nicodemus from last week, the good Bible-believing moral teacher, the teacher of the law? Jesus spends more time speaking to this woman than he does to Nicodemus. There's more to this story than what appears to be on the surface, the problem of a woman who appears to have had more husbands than Elizabeth Taylor. I'm going to suggest that John is telling us a much deeper story. He's telling us something deeper than the waters that are in the well. When John mentions Jesus meeting a woman at a well, his audience would have immediately perked up and recognized this as a story they've heard before. The Old Testament contains stories about men meeting women at wells. It's kind of like in the 1990s, there are a number of rom-com movies that had the same typical kind of plot that kind of became cliches. The successful but overworked woman who has an awkward encounter with a man who she finds so obnoxious. But then gradually, over the film, she is won over by his charm. Or the story about the man and the woman who grew up as best friends, and they find themselves in a situation where they have to pretend to be a couple or pretend to be married, and they eventually do fall in love. The Hallmark Channel has an endless vault of romantic cliches. In John's Gospel, a well is not just a well, it's a sign. John's audience would have said, aha, man meets woman at a well. We know how this story is going to end. They assumed that a man and a woman meeting at a well would end up sitting in a tree, Kissing, and there would be wedding bells. They would have thought this because of all the stories that they remembered from their childhood, stories that were passed down to them. In the Old Testament, Abraham's son Isaac goes off to a foreign land, and just outside the city, he stops at a well. He sees a woman collecting water in her bucket. And guess what he asks her? Can I have a drink of water? And she says, I'll draw water not only for you, I'll draw water for your camels as well. And it was love at first sight. Isaac found his Rebekah. Later, their deceptive son Jacob goes off to a foreign land, comes upon a well where he sees a woman, and Jacob is smitten. It is love at first sight. But instead of going and asking the woman for water, he goes directly to her father and asks for her hand in marriage. The man turns out to be Jacob's uncle Laban, and the woman is his cousin, Rachel. Laban somehow tricks Jacob into working for him for 14 years before he will hand Rachel over to him for marriage. During that 14 years, Laban actually tricks Jacob into marrying his other daughter, Leah, Rachel's sister. But Jacob was persistent, and his persistence and patience ended him getting him married to a second time to his preferred wife. Jacob found his Rachel. Later, before he became known as the great leader of the Israelites, Moses fled Pharaoh of Egypt, goes to a foreign land, and ends up at, can you guess it, a well. And while he's there, a priest of Midian arrives with his daughters, and a group of men begin harassing the daughters. Moses stands up and intervenes to defend them. And later he ends up marrying one of the priest's daughters. Moses found his Zipporah. Man meets woman at a well became a kind of story convention, a cliche. Man runs off to a foreign land, meets a woman, falls in love, and they get hitched. A cliche, a trope. It's interesting that in the previous chapter, in chapter 3, John refers to Jesus as the bridegroom, right before Jesus shows up at a well. So when John tells us that Jesus goes off to a foreign land, ends up at a well, sees a woman drawing water, asks for water, and strikes up a conversation, John's audience knew that it was time to cue up, here comes the bride. They knew how this story was going to end. Or did they? The plot veers off when Jesus appears to go off script. They start talking about water, but then they end up talking about living water and thirst and worship and truth. He talks to a woman who has more baggage than an airport carousel. Jason Michelli observes that in the Bible, numbers are also a storytelling device. The number 7 corresponds to the 7 days of creation and symbolizes completeness, wholeness. The number 6 suggests imperfection, coming up just short of perfection, just shy of 7. Close but no cigar. Imperfection, the number 6. In this exchange, we find out that this woman has had 5 husbands, and now she's working on number 6, a man who is not her husband. 5 husbands. In the Hebrew, the word for husband is Baal, B-A-A-L, and the plural husbands is Balim, B-A-L-I-M, and it means Lord or Master. The numbers are telling a story. In 2 Kings, we're told that when the Assyrians invaded the northern kingdom of Israel, it ended in the fall of Samaria. And when the Assyrians settled into Samaria, the Assyrians intermarried with the Samaritans, and they brought with them different idols, different gods. Can you guess how many gods they brought? 5. They brought them from particular cities. Can you guess how many cities they brought them from? 5. Here's where words and numbers in the Bible become really interesting. The Hebrew word for idol is Baal, B-A-A-L, same word for husband. The Hebrew word for idols, the plural, is Balim, B-A-L-I-M, same word for husbands. What if this is not a story about a woman who just can't find the right man, and is more a story about a woman who has never found the right Lord, the Lord who completes her? What if this is not a story about the dangers of immorality, but is really a story about the emptiness of idolatry? And the sixth man, the one who is not her husband, what could he represent? John's audience knew that near the Samaritan town of Sychar, Herod the Great had turned the capital city of Samaria into a Roman city and named it after Caesar. And Herod filled the city with thousands of Roman colonizers. Except this time the Samaritans chose not to intermarry with them as they had with the Assyrians, which may explain why Jesus says, "And the one you have now, the sixth, is not your husband, not your Baal." Herod demanded the Samaritans to call him Lord Baal. What if this is not just a story about Jesus gently correcting and rebuking a woman with a checkered past? What if it's more of a joyful yet prophetic announcement that the seventh husband is the true Baal, the true Lord, who longs to bring completeness to a people who have been thirsting and searching for the true Lord? This explains why the Samaritan woman goes from talking about husbands to talking about worship and declares that Jesus must be a prophet. He must be in the know about idols and idolatry and true worship. Prophets did not confront individuals about their multiple marriages. Prophets called people out of their idolatry. The conversation goes from husbands to worship and the place of true worship. And the woman notes that one of the things that separated the Jews from their spiritual cousins, the Samaritans, was the question of where does true worship take place? Where does true worship in the presence of God, where is it located? Where is it to be found? Jews said it was in Jerusalem. Samaritans said it was in Mount Gerizim. Jesus said, "The day is coming and is now here, when people will not argue about how to get to God, for God will search them out and find them." The woman is even more intrigued. "I know that when Messiah comes, he will explain all things." And the next words out of Jesus' mouth are life-changing, earth-shattering. He speaks the name that was spoken to Moses, that was given to Moses from the burning bush. I am the one who is speaking to you. I am is the very name of God, Yahweh. Jesus reveals something about the woman that he could not have known before he reveals something about himself that she could not have known. One preacher says that this is a pivotal moment in this conversation. By telling the woman who she is, Jesus shows her who he is. Jesus is the one in whose presence you know who you really are. In fact, in John's gospel, this Samaritan woman is the first person whom Jesus reveals himself to as the Messiah. The first person to know Jesus and see Jesus as the Messiah was not the great teacher of Israel, was not the learned Pharisee, not someone who was morally upright with a pristine reputation, but instead was a person wrong gender, wrong race, wrong religion, the subject of the scuttlebutt, the gossip. Jesus chooses to reveal himself to her. After her encounter with Jesus, she breathlessly runs back to the city with a message, a sermon on her lips. And her message was not, "Jesus has shown me the error of my sinful ways." She did not say, "Come and meet a man that I met because he has taken away all of my questions and all of my doubts." No, her message to the city was, "Come and meet a man who's told me everything I've ever done. He can't be the Messiah, can he?" That was her sermon. That was the way she evangelized the entire city. And they came running to see Jesus. Let me ask you, if someone invited you, come and meet someone who's ever told, who will tell you everything that you have ever done, and I mean everything that you have ever done, would you be excited to meet this person? Would that be good news for you? It was good news for this woman. She felt safe with Jesus. Jesus may have been the only man she'd ever felt safe with. She was thirsting to be known. Her previous husbands, her previous idols would not quench her thirst. Neither would her community. But Jesus will risk knowing her in all of her vulnerability. Jesus will be the seventh Baal, the seventh Lord, the seventh husband who will complete her. I wonder how many people gather on churches on Sunday mornings after muddling through life during the week, and they despair. They sit there and they think to themselves, no one really knows me. And if they did, they wouldn't want to know any more about me. Jesus comes to this woman and approaches her with his own vulnerability. Often we want to make Jesus sort of the hero of this story. Jesus crosses boundaries, speaks to this outsider, but remember, Jesus is in the woman's territory. He is in Samaritan territory, not Jewish territory. Jesus is at a well that this woman knows all too well. Jesus is the outsider in this story. He is the guest. Jesus is the one who is thirsty and is dependent on this woman to quench his thirst. Jesus is given water by this woman whom everybody thinks they know, but they really don't. But only Jesus knows her, really knows her. And Jesus doesn't walk away from her. He names all of who she is, the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between. But not in a way that shames her, but rather in a way that restores her and renews her and gives her hope. He allows the truth of who she is to be revealed to him so that the truth of who he is can be revealed to her. Jesus came to the well in the middle of the day, alone. And then a Samaritan woman encounters him. She is carrying a water jar to collect what she needed to quench her thirst. But did you notice something at the end of this story? She leaves the water jar at the well. She didn't get what she was looking for, but she left with what she needed. Later on in John's Gospel, Jesus will reveal himself once again at high noon. He will show the world God's love fully displayed on a cross. It is the cross that tells us everything we need to know about who God is in Jesus Christ. It is the cross that tells us what we need to know. Thanks be to God. Amen.